Welcome back to the channel. Today's story will shake you. It's about love, betrayal, and a twist that no one saw coming. It all began in a quiet neighborhood where two sisters grew up under the same roof but never shared the same heart. One was gentle, the kind whose smile could calm a storm. The other carried beauty like a weapon and charm like a secret. Though they were stepsisters, their lives were woven together like fabric stitched with both silk and thorn. The gentle one had found love. A man who spoke softly, who looked at her like she was the only star in his night sky. Their love grew in quiet corners, between evening walks and shared dreams. She introduced him to her family, unaware that in that moment, destiny had quietly flipped a page. Her stepsister watched from the sidelines. Not with admiration, but with a hunger she didn't bother to hide. She saw the fiancé not as a person, but as a prize she deserved. Every smile he gave, every kind word, she stored it like stolen treasure. Soon, small things began to change. The fiancé started spending more time at the house, and somehow, conversations with the stepsister lasted longer than they should. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in when she spoke, and made sure her presence filled every empty space. The gentle one noticed, but love makes the heart slow to suspect. She trusted them both, blind to the betrayal already growing roots beneath her feet. Then one morning, she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. In hushed tones, behind the kitchen door, her fiancé said, "Maybe we were meant to be." And her stepsister's reply came like a slap, "Then let's make it happen." Her world cracked silently. She didn't scream. She just stood there, her hands trembling, listening as the two people she trusted most planned a future that didn't include her. She walked away from that door with her heart dragging behind her like a broken wing. This was only the beginning. Fate was watching, and it had not spoken its last word. The days that followed felt like walking barefoot on broken glass. She smiled when people were watching, but inside, her heart was bleeding in places no one could see. Her stepsister suddenly became extra sweet, bringing her breakfast in bed, complimenting her clothes, even calling her dear more than usual. It was all a show, a performance meant to hide the dagger behind her back. Her fiancé grew distant. He canceled dates with weak excuses and answered calls with distracted tones. When she asked if something was wrong, he said, "You worry too much." But his eyes carried guilt like shadows that refused to leave. Then one evening, everything shattered. Her father called a family meeting. Everyone gathered in the sitting room, unaware that betrayal was about to walk in wearing a wedding dress. Her stepsister stood up dramatically, cleared her throat, and said with a fake shy smile, "I have something to announce." The room went silent. She looked at her fiancé, who shifted nervously in his chair. Then the bomb dropped. "We're getting married." For a moment, time froze. The words echoed like a slap in the face. She looked at her fiancé, expecting him to laugh and say it was a joke. But he didn't. He held her stepsister's hand like a man who had made his choice. Her heart broke loudly this time. She couldn't hide it. Tears spilled down her face like a river that had waited too long to burst its banks. Her father shouted in confusion. Her stepmother clapped slowly, satisfied. Neighbors peeked through the window, whispering like fire on dry leaves. She ran out of the house barefoot, into the cold night. She didn't know where she was going, she just needed air. She collapsed by the roadside, her dress soaked in dust, her dreams scattered like torn paper in the wind. But as she sat there, something changed. A quiet fire lit up inside her. She realized that while they had betrayed her, they hadn't destroyed her. Fate was watching, and it was far from done. Somewhere, somehow, tables would turn. Weeks passed, but the pain didn't fade. The wedding preparations moved fast, like they were racing against her broken heart. Invitations were printed, fabrics were chosen, and the house buzzed with excitement that didn't include her. Her stepsister paraded around like a queen, flaunting rings and wedding plans, while her fiancé, now ex, avoided her eyes like a coward who knew he'd traded gold for glitter. She locked herself in her room most days, but at night she sat by the window, staring into the dark, whispering questions the wind couldn't answer. Why him? Why her? How could love turn to betrayal so easily? She wanted to hate them, but the pain was too deep to turn into anger yet. Then fate made its quiet move. One afternoon, while returning from the market, she saw something strange. Her ex-fiancé was standing outside a restaurant, holding hands with another woman, someone she didn't recognize. He looked nervous, glancing around like a thief. The woman laughed softly, brushing his arm. It wasn't innocent. She ducked behind a parked kiki, her heart pounding. She watched as he led the woman inside, acting like a man with secrets buried under smooth smiles. Her stepsister had stolen him, but clearly, someone else had stolen him too. A mix of shock and strange satisfaction washed over her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. Instead, she watched silently, as if fate had just opened a small window to the truth. The following days, she quietly observed. He kept sneaking out. Late calls, whispered excuses, and unfamiliar perfumes clinging to his shirts. Her stepsister, too busy bragging about the wedding, didn't notice. One evening, curiosity pushed her closer. She followed him discreetly. Through narrow streets, past shops closing for the night, until he met the same woman again. This time, she caught him kissing her. Her heart didn't break. It burned, with clarity. The man who betrayed her was now betraying his new bride-to-be. And she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of their fall. Fate had started to speak. And it wasn't whispering anymore. The wedding week arrived like a storm nobody could stop. Drums echoed, canopies were raised, and colorful fabrics filled the compound. Her stepsister moved around like a peacock, giving orders and flashing her engagement ring at anyone who would look. People whispered about how lucky she was to be marrying such a handsome man. But beneath all the noise, fate was patiently sharpening its knife. She stayed mostly indoors, pretending to be indifferent. But inside, she carried a secret now, the truth about the men they were all celebrating. She watched quietly as guests arrived, gifts piled up, and laughter filled the air. Her stepsister barely noticed her, too drunk on attention to see the cracks forming under her perfect day. On the wedding morning, the house buzzed with excitement. Makeup artists rushed in and out. Photographers clicked endlessly. The bride wore a glittering dress, beaming with pride. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, whispers started floating through the compound like smoke. The groom was late. At first, they laughed it off. Maybe traffic, someone said. He'll be here soon, the bride replied nervously, forcing a smile. Minutes stretched into hours. Phones rang without answers. The priest paced. Guests began exchanging uneasy glances. Then, like a bad joke, a car screeched into the compound. The groom stumbled out, disheveled, face pale, shirt stained. Behind him, another woman stepped out of the car angrily, throwing a handbag at him. Liar, she shouted. The entire compound froze. The bride's smile collapsed. Guests gasped. Cameras stopped clicking. The truth spilled quickly. The woman he'd been sneaking around with had followed him that morning, furious after finding out about the wedding. She exposed everything right there, in front of everyone. The bride tried to deny it, but the evidence was too loud to ignore. She stood in the corner, silent but steady. Watching. The same people who had once whispered behind her back were now whispering about her stepsister. The betrayal had returned to its owners, wrapped neatly by fate itself. The wedding never happened. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't cry. She just watched the drama unfold like a storm finally hitting the shore. After the chaos of that day, the house that once buzzed with wedding songs became silent like a graveyard. Guests left in whispers, some shaking their heads, others secretly amused. The decorations were still hanging, but they looked tired, like they had witnessed too much. The bride locked herself in her room, refusing to eat or speak, while her mother shouted at everyone, blaming the world for what was clearly their own doing. She moved through the house quietly, like a shadow. Nobody expected her to speak, but deep down, they knew she had seen the storm coming long before it arrived. She felt no joy in their downfall, but there was a strange peace in knowing that justice had worked without her lifting a finger. The groom tried to fix things, calling the bride endlessly, sending gifts, begging. But his lies were out in the open now. The other woman had gone to social media, exposing everything. Pictures, chats, late-night calls, everything was posted for the world to see. The once proud groom became a joke overnight. Her stepsister couldn't handle the shame. She stopped going out. Friends avoided her. Neighbors whispered louder now. All the pride she had paraded vanished like smoke. She had wanted a fairy tale wedding, what she got was a public disaster. One afternoon, as she returned from the market, a car pulled over beside her. It was a clean black SUV. The man who stepped out was calm, neatly dressed, and polite. He explained that he'd seen her helping an elderly woman earlier and was impressed by her kindness. He was a businessman who had recently moved to town. Their conversation was simple, but something about him felt different, steady, respectful, real. She didn't flirt or rush. She had learned too much from heartbreak to jump blindly. But as they talked, she felt a gentle spark she hadn't felt in months. For once, the attention wasn't forced, and the smile wasn't fake. Her stepsister watched this quietly from the balcony, bitterness brewing as she saw the tables slowly turning. Fate wasn't finished yet, but it was already rearranging the board. Their paths crossed again a week later, not by accident this time. He stopped by the market where she sold a few handmade items and greeted her with a warm smile that didn't feel rehearsed. He asked if she remembered him, and she nodded shyly. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, measured, without the pride most men carried like perfume. He told her his name and explained he had recently opened a small logistics company nearby. She listened politely, still guarded, but his sincerity slowly chipped at the walls she had built. Soon, their conversations became frequent, not forced. He would buy a few things from her stall, help her carry heavy bags without being asked, and ask questions that showed he genuinely cared. Meanwhile, the house she once shared with her stepsister was filled with tension. Her stepsister's failed wedding had become the talk of the town. Friends avoided her. Relatives whispered behind her back. The groom had vanished, too ashamed to show his face. All the mockery they once threw at her now circled back to them like a stubborn echo. She didn't gloat. She simply focused on her life, healing slowly, smiling more. Fate had removed the poison from her path, and now it was clearing space for something new. One evening, as the sun melted into a golden glow, he invited her for a casual dinner. She hesitated at first, remembering how her heart had been bruised. But something about his quiet patience made it hard to say no. The restaurant was simple but beautiful, lit with warm lights and soft music. For the first time in a long while, she laughed freely. Not the forced laugh she used to hide pain, but a real one that came from somewhere deep. He didn't try to impress her with money or promises, he just listened. At that moment, she realized something. Her story wasn't ending with betrayal. It was unfolding into something unexpected and gentle. Fate had indeed spoken, and this time it was on her side. As weeks turned into months, their bond grew quietly, like a tree taking root. He was different from anyone she had known, gentle but firm, generous but humble. He didn't rush her, he allowed her to heal at her own pace. Slowly, she found herself smiling at little things again. One morning, he invited her to his office. She expected a small space, maybe 1 or 2 desks. But when she entered, her breath caught. The building was modern, buzzing with staff moving confidently from one department to another. His name was boldly written on the company signboard. He wasn't just running a small business, he owned one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the region. She looked at him, stunned. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered. He smiled. "Because I wanted you to see me first as a man, not as money." Her heart stirred. She remembered her stepsister, who had chased wealth like a thirsty traveler chasing mirages, only to end up with ashes. And here was a man who carried riches quietly, without flaunting them. Back home, things had worsened for her stepsister. The failed wedding had left scars too deep to hide. Their father's trust in her dwindled, neighbors mocked openly, and the same friends who once praised her now laughed behind her back. She couldn't stand the sight of her stepsister being happy, so bitterness grew like weeds in her chest. One evening, as the gentle one returned from her visit to the company, she found her stepsister waiting at the gate, eyes red, face hard. "So this is your plan?" she hissed. "You want to rise while I fall? You think fate loves you more?" She shook her head calmly. "I didn't plan anything. I only lived." Whatever is happening, it's not my doing. But the stepsister's envy was boiling. Enjoy it while it lasts. Fate can still change. The gentle one walked past without another word, her silence stronger than any insult. Deep down, she knew fate had already chosen sides. Months later, life had changed in ways she never imagined. Her small stall had grown into a proper shop, thanks to his quiet support and her renewed determination. She carried herself differently now, still humble, but with a quiet confidence that came from surviving heartbreak and finding strength in the ruins. Their bond deepened steadily. He respected her space, but his presence became a soft anchor in her life. Soon, whispers began to spread, not of scandal this time, but of admiration. People noticed how happy she looked. Even neighbors who once pitied her now greeted her with newfound respect. Meanwhile, her stepsister's bitterness had eaten deep. She avoided public gatherings, her pride now a shadow of what it used to be. She watched from windows as life favored the one she once mocked. The groom who abandoned her had moved on, leaving her with nothing but memories of what could have been. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and gold, he invited her to a small event at his company. She arrived in a simple but elegant dress, her natural beauty shining effortlessly. He introduced her to his colleagues proudly, not as a random guest, but as someone special. Then, in front of everyone, he took the microphone, smiled warmly, and said, "When I met her, I saw kindness. I saw strength. I saw a woman who didn't give up when life broke her heart. And today, I want the world to know, I choose her." The room erupted in applause. She stood frozen, eyes wide, tears welling up. It wasn't a dramatic proposal with fireworks. It was simple, honest, and real, everything her heart had longed for. Back at home, her stepsister heard the news. Neighbors talked excitedly. Some smiled, others shook their heads, but everyone knew, fate had written the final line. She sat by her window that night, looking at the stars. Not out of sadness, but gratitude. Life had tested her, broken her, and still found a way to reward her patience. Fate had indeed spoken. And this time, it spoke loudly for everyone to hear.